There we go. In addition to that, I'll go through some housekeeping items as part of this. When you're not speaking, we'd ask that you stay on mute. If you're wanting to speak, that you would raise a hand, give me a signal, and I will do my best to make sure that you're recognized and be able to provide you that platform. Lastly, as part of this chat box usage, my first ask would be that you sign in using the chat box. That is recorded, and that will be our documentation for record of you being part of this meeting. But also, if you've got any burning questions that maybe during a presentation or hearing from one of the speakers that you wanted to jot in there, that will give me an opportunity to circle back and be able to call upon that question. As part of this opening and introductory remarks, from my stance as assistant superintendent and helping to steer some of this, I want to extend a huge thank you for our participants that did send out a letter on behalf of our HAC, the Health Advisory Committee, to Commissioner Corcoran in support of keeping Palm Beach County schools in distance learning mode to open the school year. As we've talked about in our last two meetings, the school district and the Health Advisory Committee have a steadfast priority to reopen schools with health, safety, and learning in mind, and continuing to do so and staying focused on when and how that is determined for all of our stakeholders here in Palm Beach County. I'll take a moment and I'll acclimate us to the agenda and again, refocus our purpose and intent of today's meeting. And purpose and intent of today's meeting is really centered on the reopening plan and reopening metrics, which we will dive into here shortly. But let me present and I'll show you all the agenda. I know it was part of the public announcement, but I want to make sure that we're all clear on where we're heading for today. So Health Advisory Committee members, we're starting with introductory remarks. We've done so. Reopening plan update. We're going to get to hear from our Deputy Superintendent, Mr. Keith Oswald, on some of the reopening plan aspects that were presented to our school board last Wednesday, and rolling directly into that PowerPoint or slides of that PowerPoint around specifically metrics and the purposeful nature of both our superintendent and leadership around these metrics, and really yielding to the advice of the Health Advisory Committee in some of those aspects. We'll move then to our open discussion forum that we've had with Dr. Fenoy, and raising metric questions on a safe and successful return to our brick and mortar schools, and when that time comes and how that's going to look. We'll conclude with action steps and adjournment at 4 o'clock. At this point, seeing we have nearly 30 participants, acclimating you to the agenda, we are ready to move into the next phase of that piece, and that's our presentation of the reopening plan and PowerPoint piece with our Deputy Superintendent, Mr. Keith Oswald. I yield the floor to you, Mr. Oswald, for presentation.
Thank you, Jay. I appreciate that. And good afternoon. I want to thank the entire Health Advisory Committee. It's good to see you, and we so appreciate all of the guidance and support that you are giving us. Last week, we did present the plan to the board. I don't know if you all had the pleasure of the 10 hours and 15 minutes of that meeting. If you didn't, I'm going to give you kind of the highlights of what occurred that night. There's probably half of that 4 or 5 hours were public speakers. When we presented to the board, the beginning of the plan really discussed about our rationale and our decision-making for the superintendent and the school district to make a recommendation to open a distance learning. And it was based on 3 factors. The first being, 1, this particular committee, the Health Advisory Committee, the Superintendent's Health Advisory Committee, and our discussion and your concerns around opening of schools. Second was based off the governor's reopening Florida plan, which speaks to a number of metrics. In particular, for those school districts that are in phase one, if there's an increase in the number of cases of COVID-19 in the particular area, that they should remain in phase one. In phase one, there was a presentation that was done on April 29th by the governor, which stated that for schools, and I'm going to also start sharing. That for schools that are in phase one, that they should remain in distance learning. So because of those particular three factors, we recommended that we continue in the distance learning. From that, the presentation went into about the improvements of what's occurred since the end of last school year to the opening, where Dr. Sheffield and the rest of the team went into the improvements that we made in distance learning, working with our unions, et cetera, for a increased quality distance learning program. And where I would like to now really kind of jump into, and if anybody has any questions about the entire meeting or the presentation, we can definitely speak to that. But in particular, was around the reopening, and our goal is to get back into bricks and mortar and what those metrics look like. And we did talk to the board about these benchmarks that are in the governor's Safe, Smart, Step-by-Step Recovery Plan, which speaks to the syndromic surveillance, epidemiology, outbreak and decline, and healthcare capability. More your all's language than mine, but I'm becoming more of a healthcare professional as this time goes forward. But the first set of metrics were around a downward trajectory of influenza-like illnesses, as well as COVID-19 like illnesses. And then second set of metrics was around an either or in his plan, the downward trajectory of documented COVID-19 cases or percent positive. And then the last is really around healthcare capability. So number of beds and then the actual tests that occur. So moving forward, what we told the board is that we were going to bring back to you all are these particular areas and talk about recommendations around these metrics, and if there's anything else that we're potentially missing when we speak about metrics to reopen. So these particular areas are what the board, or I should say the governor, would move South Florida in particular, Broward, Miami-Dade, and Palm Beach from phase one to phase two would also be based on these. So for the COVID-19 trend, whether that's the number percent positive or the number of cases, that there would be a 14-day decline, but also wanted to allow you all to speak to if that's what you all would support as well, or potentially what the percent positive should look like. Should that be a trend or just at a certain benchmark? The ICU capacity, which I believe is roughly about a 30% capability of each of the hospitals, percent of test target, shooting for and within the plan was 500,000 tests a day. The ILI being low, and again, percent of positive tests both for ILI or COVID-19. So I'm going to stop for right now to let you all kind of react to what we propose, and first to turn it over to Superintendent Fenoy, if there's any comments you'd like to make before we turn it over to have the group to react to these particular areas.
No, I don't have any comments to add at this time.
Thank you. Then, so Jay, do you want to go ahead and we'll open it up to the floor?
Yes, sir. Keith, I wanted to make mention as we opened up. I appreciate you bringing the reopening plan. And these are the exact slides that were presented to our school board, and making mention that validation to the weight and magnitude of the HAC and bringing these metrics back for consideration, and really clarifying whether it be data, language, targets, on these 5 metrics that were proposed to our school board last Wednesday. So yes, at this time, we would open that open discussion forum and hear back from our healthcare professionals on really what are your thoughts on this. If these metrics are in place, are we able and feel confident in reopening our brick and mortars? We'll pause there and open.
Well, one of the things I will add is part of why these metrics matter so much to the district is I need from the Health Advisory Committee sort of the translation. So I was on a call I think it was yesterday, and I heard a 10-day COVID positive trend downwards. And so part of what I seek from the Health Advisory Committee is what is the latest thinking, and maybe all this will change as we get closer to opening schools, but we must put the kids back in brick and mortar. And so so part of the metric conversation is literally out of my wheelhouse and most of my team's wheelhouse. So this is where we really need your advice on how we set up metrics that the community will believe. I think Representative Wilhite and I were on a call this morning, and there's information that is accurate. And I think even my old board members have been clear that part of our challenge or our responsibility is to educate the community. However, I just saw someone type in the chat room 10 days. So, these are the sort of conversations I want to have with this group, is like, what data, what metrics should we actually be looking at that are consistent in the healthcare professional world that will then lend us to starting that phased-in approach to opening schools?
I see Mr. Wilhite.
Yeah, thank you. Something that I think to consider that gives me pause too is the turnaround time on test results. So some places can get it done very quick, but for the most part, it seems as though 10 to 14 days is getting to be the norm. For instance, and I mentioned this today, and Dr. Fenoy knows, Quest has said nationally it's taking them approximately 14 days because they're so overwhelmed to get results back. Why that's important is because if we do have someone that has symptoms that goes out to get tested, in that 14-day period, that's 2 weeks worth of school they're potentially going to miss, or 2 weeks worth of learning. So if it takes that long to get the results back, I think that could have an impact. For instance, if our teacher tested and you had to take a teacher out for 2 weeks, that could really impact, do we have someone to backfill that position or to take over? So I think that test result return could be very impactful as well.
And so for clarification for me, so as another potential metric as well, the return time on test results?
Yes, sir. And and again, yes, that is something. If we're at that time of distance to get a return on a test, how impactful that could be. Like I say, for a teacher is out, I think that could be an impact on how long, because that turnaround time is also being affected by the number of tests that are being done because of how busy they are, right? So if it's still on the rise and there's still that much testing going on, and it's taking that long because they are overwhelmed at the labs, I think that does impact us.
Thank you.
Can I speak?
Yes, please do.
Yes, hi, this is Dr. Jean Malecki. I'll speak to what was just mentioned about turnaround time for testing. I think we just have to accept the fact that what the turnaround testing is right now is going to be different and will improve over time. And in fact, they just approved the pool testing, which will allow an increased number of individuals to be tested at one time, clearing away individuals who were testing negative. And so that will increase the amount of turnaround time, and certainly finding the number of individuals who are negative and then ultimately tested further to be positive. So I think we're going to have to go with the information we have at the moment and then change according to the research that comes out.
Thank you, Dr. Malecki.
May I speak?
Yes, Dr. Robinson, we're talking about the transition from virtual learning to brick and mortar.
Can you hear me?
Yes, we hear you.
Yes, we can hear you speaking.
Yes, First of all, I wanted to thank you, all of you guys, for the amazing work that you're doing. Honestly, I don't even know how you're doing it. And God, you will go down in history for doing an amazing job. But as a scientist, I wanted to make sure that we don't forget the basics. There's a lot of uncertainty around this pandemic, but there are things that we know that we need to do before we can proceed any further. And with the sharp decline in immunizations in children, I really would like to know if we have had any thoughts about any campaigns encouraging immunizations even before we contemplate bringing kids back to school.
Was the question, could you repeat the question about immunizations? I'm sorry.
So my question is, since the pandemic, there has been a sharp decline to less than 45% from my last I reviewed of immunizations in children. Mm-hmm. Will determine really how we can proceed on children even contemplating going back to school. Don't we have to prioritize encouraging immunizations prior to we can go any further in things that we don't know? And I think there's a pediatrician in the group that is really, really awesome. I don't know if he's on the call. Dr. Sheckman.
Dr. Sheckman had a full patient today.
So I think the way to answer your question, well, I can't answer your question fully, but the school district currently has already, or the school board has already established expectations of families as it relates to certain vaccinations. I honestly, the team and I will have to take that back. I'm not sure about the realities of the current situation of the declining and opportunities for families to do that. But there are certain benchmarks, like mine's going into the 7th grade, where we have to turn in certain records in order for him to come in brick and mortar. We have not had a discussion about expanding that beyond what we already have in place. Keith, am I saying that correctly?
Yeah, so I know there's been a lot of work behind the scenes that we work with each school, with those who have students who are not immunized, to get those numbers up. We have done district campaigns in the past. We have not done a district campaign right now, I think due to the situation. I mean, the national attention I'm seeing is of concerns that families have going into any facility right now to get vaccinated. It is something that we work closely with the health department on, and the healthcare district regarding our numbers, which I know that I see Jenny's on here too, that are often of concern that we continue to try to keep those numbers lower. There is work to be done, and we're really kind of going school by school and student by student.
Mr. Borges, may I speak, please?
Yes. Anyone that would like to speak, it's a bit difficult with the presentation and monitoring the committee members. So yes, Ms. Chacon, go ahead.
Yeah. Well, so as a scientist and with previous clinical experience, and I have been working a lot with microorganisms at the level, biosafety level 2, level 3, looking at the numbers, it looks like younger kids are less affected and less contagious than the older kids. And I think that also during the meeting that you had with the school board, there were a lot of parents talking about what will they do with the younger kids at home. And perhaps we could look at the possibility of starting opening the school with the younger kids. And I know that there are numbers of the pediatric cases that are being reported by the Florida State Health Department. But I think that that would be an option to consider. There have been experiences all over the world where, you know, the younger kids seem to be the safest ones to start with. So I will consider that as a proposal, and that will be backed by all the data that we have regarding the pediatric population and how they are affected by the virus.
In this same line of questioning, very curious. So in our plan, when the county goes into phase 2, then what the board has approved is kindergarten 1st and 2nd, 6th grade and 9th grade going into the buildings first. And right. Obviously, as Mr. Oswald said, the 2-week intervals. So the question that I'm having now with the current data, could someone talk to me about the infection rate of what I would consider the 11th and 12th graders, kids that are over 15? I keep hearing different conversations around there's a different reality for kids, 16, 17, 18 than the younger kids as it relates to this. I'm just very curious what you guys know to be true in your world.
Yeah, I shared with you actually, Dr. Fenoy, publications regarding to that. And basically, it seems to be a consensus that when the kids up to 11 years old, they seem to be okay and will be the safest ones to bring back. But when they get into teenagers, older than 11, 12 years old, and I shared that, I sent you the publications regarding that. So when we talk about younger kids, it really is more like up to 11 to 12 years old that they will be safer. And then once they get into probably the middle school, high school, I think those will be the ones that we need to be more careful about.
Thank you. And is that mostly because those children are more apt to be out and about, or is there something scientific associated with it?
Actually, scientifically, it looks like if the receptor, the ACE2 receptor, that is the one that the virus uses to attach to the human cells, doesn't seem to be as developed in those kids. And when they get older, the receptors that are the parts of the cells that the virus uses to get inside of the cells, those receptors seems to be, again, in the younger populations, they are finding out that they are mature receptors. So it's sort of like, it will be like, it will make it more difficult in general for the virus to get into the kids and to reproduce so much inside of their cells.
So I have Dr. Alonso on the line, and she's texting me here. She might be having some technical difficulties, but she's wanting to weigh in. Dr. Alonso, are you able to speak at this point? Not hearing or seeing. Texting back. Okay. Apologies. We'll keep working on that, Dr. Alonso. We'll continue conversation.
Can I speak to that? This is Jean Malecki.
Yes, Dr. Malecki, please do.
Yeah, I just want to make a comment about what's available scientifically as it relates to morbidity data or that information where people get sick, recover, and then long-term disabling types of problems. And the recent literature has spoken to the impact on children. We've been focusing so much on death rates, people dying, and people in hospitals and the long hospital stays, even though they may survive. The issue, though, is that there are lots of young people getting sick now. That's the increase in the classification of the age groupings that are being looked at and being scientifically revealed to us, that they too as well are developing what appear to be long-term problems, from neurological to lung to kidney, all the organs, if you will. So I think because you have 6 months of information on a brand new virus that's being exposed to human beings throughout the world, and we're focusing here in the United States in Palm Beach County, that we take caution as it relates to they don't get as sick as much or those types of statements, because we don't know. We just don't know yet. And the information will be coming forth day in and day out on that. And I just asked the group to keep an open mind and be patient, because this really is moment by moment science.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. It's important, though, because eventually we will need to think about bringing the kids back to the schools. And I understand we all want to keep them safe, but at the same time, I can feel the pressure, and that, basically, we will need to start thinking about that and how it has been done in some other places successfully. I personally think that, we need to start working and, writing and developing our SOPs for phase 2. And, because eventually I think that, they will need to be back, and perhaps we need to do it in the safest way. And I agree, this is a science that is changing by the minute. But, we also need to think about the reality, we need to, we cannot really push for keeping all the schools closed because, we know the parents need, I mean, it's a complicated situation as it was seen in the board meeting. I have personal experience. I have, kids who have been, in situations that are not the best for them at home. So, I guess, it's such a difficult, but I'm just looking at both sides.
No, we agree. I mean, that's why when we presented our plan, it was basically 2 plans, which is the continuation of distance learning in a much better way, but also getting back into the buildings. Again, as a parent of a 4-year-old and 11-year-old, this is very important to me as well. And I think, so what I want to share with the committee at this time is, we've listened to you loud and clear. So we've bought well over 1 million masks. We've bought facial shields. We now have plastic partitions going up in every school in the district, first starting in a lot of the common areas, front office areas. We're investigating these little plastic foldable, washable shields at the desks. We just decided yesterday to change our filters out in our air conditioning systems more often. Now, I'm saying all of this because all of this stuff is costing money that we did not plan for. So thanks to the CARES Act, thanks to some of the recommendations of the board, and the fact that we were able to put some money away by making some staff reductions internally on the executive level, we have some money set aside for those things. We're also putting Wi-Fi on buses. We are right now planning on following the CDC guidelines associated with busing. However, that is becoming a bigger challenge every single day, how we protect those employees who have to walk past those kids. Questions are still coming up about thermometer checks. I remember what this group said to us a couple of weeks ago, so we're still investigating that. I think the good news is, in terms of returning to school, I don't know if people really understood this. The actual return to school plan is still voluntary. So for families that choose to stay out, they can still stay out. So the only population we'll be dealing with are families that want to come back in the building. And our strategy was that gives us an opportunity to the best of our ability, keep the numbers down, but also monitor it and make adjustments and get back with this committee to see what actually happens. One of the things that we're kind of hung up on right now, the current CDC guidelines say that if there's a COVID positive case in the building, there's like a 24-hour cycle, or even in some cases 48-hour cycle to clean the building and deal with all those things. Now, we have environmental specialists helping with that. What I would like to avoid at all costs, and I don't even know if this is possible, is shutting down entire schools every time a positive case comes back. Right now, I haven't heard a superintendent across the country who has figured that part out. Some are saying they won't let parents know. They'll just deal with it on a case-by-case basis. We have not done that in Palm Beach County. We have been transparent since the beginning, so I don't see the good of hiding any information from anyone. I've heard people say, well, we'll just shut down those certain classrooms. That sounds good in theory, but so this is a lot to figure out on that. But I just want this committee to know that when we get back into the building, it will still be by volunteer only. And then we will begin to phase it in from there based on the science.
May I make another
Can you
comment?
hear me?
Yes, caller ending in 14.
Hi, yes, I've been muted. This is Brenda Galley from the Department of Health, School Health Director.
Hi, Dr. Galley.
I'm sorry, I tried to weigh in when Dr. Fenoy mentioned the immunizations, and I couldn't get unmuted. So I'd just like to do that now. My team at the Health Department is working with each individual school data processors. They have, for the last month and a half, been working just on 7th grade alone, and they've begun their kindergarten, because kindergarten are those students who get their boosters. They receive a lot of vaccines prior to starting kindergarten. So we've been going through records, trying to find out which students are not immunized and ready for 7th grade and kindergarten, searching the state registry, Florida Shots, finding those records and sending those 680s to the data processors, and then letting the data processors know which parents need to have letters so that they can make appointments with their providers. I did send an email out about a month ago asking if you guys could partner with us to provide back-to-school immunization events, since we are unable to do this at our clinics to provide that social distancing. We would like to be able to do that with you guys, maybe do one in each region or one school, utilize the gymnasium where we can just make sure that we maintain that social distancing and provide immunizations to those folks, those kids who need them.
If you don't mind, if you could give your contact information to Jay, we'll get that to the academic team and our executive leadership team to talk about the logistics. We'll see what's possible, talk to our attorneys and operations team. So if you can get that information, then we'll follow up with you.
Okay, because for those parents who do want their children to return brick and mortar, a lot of those will be kindergarten students who don't have their required vaccines, and they would not be able to start back brick and mortar without those.
Yes, ma'am. I happen to be one of those parents in that category.
Yeah.
So I'm listening to you loud and clear. And I have a seventh
right.
grader. So I know about that too.
Okay. But yeah, Mr. Bogus has my contact information. I look forward to hearing from you, Mr. Bogus.
Yes, ma'am. Somehow I got booted out of the meeting, but I'm back. I heard those last pieces, and yes, we will be following up and have action. Thank you, Ms. Galley.
Okay.
This is Jean Malecki again. I have one quick comment.
Yes,
Is that
Dr.
okay?
Malecki. Yes, ma'am.
Okay. There are some, pretty solid statistics out there in terms of, and as you enter the phase of generalized phase of returning to school, that you can monitor daily infection rates. That's the only statistic. And if it's less than 5% over a 14-day period of time, a 14-day average, that really gives you a green light. But if those infection rates go up to 9% or more, that really is a red light. So it's a sort of an ongoing metric. The metric for less than 5% over 14-day period, average 14-day period, and for the 9%, it would be for 7 days. That's above and beyond the statistics that have already been presented to you.
Dr. Malecki and others, I have a follow-up question to that.
Sure.
Considering the enormity of Palm Beach County,
Yes.
is there a way to get data that is, I don't know, region specific? I guess is what I'm asking. Like we have some zip code data. I mean, I've heard mixed messages on whether or not we should use that data. So I'm just very curious because, if there's I feel like there's going to come a point where we can't be universal in our decision making. I feel like if there's something happening, if the Glades is fine, I should let them go back. But if there's an outbreak in Boca, and I'm talking out loud now, but I'm just very curious.
Sure.
Everyone's thoughts about that.
Sure. You should have census tract data that could be better utilized for the purposes of schools, individual schools, and the local health department would have that. Dr. Alina Alonso has the availability through her EPI department.
Dr. Fenoy, I just received a text from Dr. Alonso, still having technical difficulties, but she says, yes, there is a mechanism to make that happen, and she'll follow up directly with you and I.
Okay, thank you.
That's the wise thing to do, and you will be able to give district-wide information to the entire county to make their decisions.
Thank you.
This is Dr. Robinson. I feel the need to respond on this. So in my mind, we can use census tract data about if we needed to go backwards, if we needed to go from stage 2 to stage 1. But I don't personally think that we are going to open certain schools and then not others, right? Because we have too much travel inside our county. Some of it's caused by our educational system. So I just want to make sure we don't run down that path too fast. Maybe we ultimately use census tract data to determine which schools partially reopen. But at first blush, I don't think we should do that. And so, but I think today, though, the point of today is to see if there's direction from this committee on what metrics we should look at to help make the decision, right? And then the geography of the metrics, I think we can continue to debate or discuss.
Thank you, Dr. Robinson. And I did pull that slide back up again. I believe what I heard regarding the COVID-19 trend, whether it's number positive or downward trend of those identified, was that it was around a 10-day versus the 14. Is that correct? Marcia, you're shaking your head no.
Yeah, no, I understood. I heard Dr. Malecki saying, and I was just going to pipe in that I was looking at New York State's plan, and it was a 14-day rolling average that they were looking at to get the 5% mark that she was using. So that that's what, at this point, I would recommend looking at others metrics, but I thought that was a good one to start with. And as long as I'm talking, I just put a comment about the testing. I share that concern about the robust testing is really going to be a key piece for us, because it definitely needs to be improved, both in the capability, or the availability, I should say, but particularly the timeliness, because I'm doing some volunteering, and I'm just still upset about how far in we are, and the fact that we're having such difficulty getting, contact tracing. I find very difficult doing when I'm getting a test result 10 to 14 days later. The other thing, just quickly about the young children, not to upset your plan, because it made sense logically in the second phase, I think I saw, where we were adding 6th and 9th grade. But I find that fascinating as we're learning more about the information coming out with the infection, infectivity, the younger population, that I'm wondering if advancing more in the elementary level, just something to consider, because they're the most affected by so many of the other things we've been concerned about, from the home situation to learning at the younger ages. So just something to think about. And finally, immunizations. Thank you, Brenda, for getting in there. I wish Sheckman was on just to talk about it, but I feel pediatricians are doing their best. I was talking to a nurse practitioner in another practice. They really have their offices geared up in trying to get people in for immunizations as much as they can. Clearly, recently it's been impacted again, but I think particularly because our markers are entry to school at kindergarten and the 7th grade immunizations, I think we're probably going to be doing pretty well with that, especially if we can reach those that have difficulty normally getting immunizations, as Brenda suggested. And that's it.
Thank you. And let me just say, you bring up a very good point. And the board and I discussed this on Wednesday. So our initial plan, as you stated, K1, kindergarten 1 and 2, and then 6th and 9th. Now, logically for us, those are 3 different campuses. Those children, none of them would have been on campus before. So we want to give them more time to get acclimated as the transitional years. But let me be very clear. One of the reasons why we will continue to meet with this group is that if that needs to change based on the new science, then the board and I are very clear that we'll have to make those changes. And so really appreciate that observation.
Dr. Fenoy, Dr. Alonso would like to reiterate Dr. Fishbane's point around the positivity rate. We're reaching nearly 12.3% currently, and our labs are at above 13%, and continuing to see the increase, not the downcline of those data pieces. Positivity rate have a goal of 10% by the state. But as far as recommendations, holding tight to what the State Department says at this point, coming from Dr. Alonso.
Let me just share for the committee. Dr. Alonso, we're on another call early this morning, and so I get to listen and speak to her regularly. And I think that was one of the points this morning, was the conversation between the 10% and the 5%. And I think what this illustrates I hope for this committee, is that the school board is almost completely dependent on people giving us information to make these decisions. And so, again, I just want to reiterate how important you guys are to us to help us navigate this. That's what I would say to that.
Yes, sir. Mr. Oswald, I lost some of the chat box when I got kicked out on the internet, and I know you were monitoring. Are there any pieces at this point that we haven't circled back to in our chat box that we need to be specifically bringing up?
I know Representative Wilhite brought up about when we look at like SOPs and different things about kids bringing the materials from school into the home and potentially trying to limit that. Also, visitors and parents coming on campus. We did put in around by appointment only, so greatly reducing the number of adults on campus, including volunteers. I think it came up again about the turnaround time so when we talk about testing capacity, it's not necessarily the number of tests per day, but the turnaround time of that testing as a metric to look at. And for my clarification, is that correct? Dr. Fishbane and others were saying? So the time frame.
Yes.
Okay. And what's a appropriate turnaround time frame?
10 to 14 days.
No, that's not appropriate.
It's not appropriate. No, I mean, it's what we have. It's not
Right.
appropriate. Of course
Right.
not.
So appropriate.
Yeah, the gold standard is 24 to 48 hours.
Right.
Other nations have achieved.
Yes.
So for us to go back to bricks and mortar, what would we are kind of proposing on that? Are we looking at a 48-hour turnaround? Or are we looking?
Can I
if we
insert
can
something in
that.
this?
I think it's out of our control at this point.
So can I insert something in this? So we're going to go through and hopefully we'll land on the metrics that this group thinks are important to monitor. And there's going to be a number of metrics. Like, I don't know if it's going to be 4, 6, 8, 12. I don't know what it's going to be, but whatever it is, then we have to say what we think is appropriate. Like, are there deal breaker metrics like this? If the percent infection is more than 10%, it doesn't matter what the rest of the metrics are. Schools cannot reopen. I mean, we have to, the hope for this health advisory committee is to provide these career educators with guidance around health. This is not their world. So we have to be really clear with them to whatever extent we can. So what I think we need to do, since we have 16 minutes left, is to go through the metrics, agree on the metrics and what the target is, outline if it's any of the metrics that are like veto proof metrics, like they have to be there, and then decide what percentage of those metrics do we think need to be present in order to move forward. And I want to keep stressing to our stage 2, which is partial reopening, because in my personal opinion, and based on what I've read in other countries, we need to be even more strict to go to full reopening, which would not have social distancing involved just because it's not enough square footage. So we're talking about the partial reopening of schools.
I just want to say, I'm an internist and I run a big practice in Boynton Beach. And Monday of last week, 9 o'clock in the morning, we got 2 calls from the 2 major commercial labs telling us, even though we had kits to test, not to send them because they did not have the capacity to run tests as of now. That was last Monday. As of today, at this time, we still have not heard from them when they will reopen their ability to run tests. Those are the 2 major commercial labs available. I don't want to mention names, but this is something we have to keep in mind before we install any metrics. If we don't know where we are, how do we know where we can go?
So I'm going to intervene because this is a conversation that is terribly important to me. And I don't want us to run out of time and still have the educators up in the air, right? So I think the turnaround time on the test is a very good addition to the metrics that we look at. I think it's excellent, right? And I also understand the realities and that we're not in control of those. But I think that that's a metric that needs to be there. I personally don't think it's a veto metric, meaning we have to have tests available within 48 hours or else schools can't reopen. I think it's a goal that we look at. So, I mean, I just think we need to walk through these metrics one by one and get the people's opinions and consensus, or else we're not going to get through this.
Thank you, Dr. Robinson. And yes, Keith, you've got these 5 metrics up. Let's take a walk through and starting with 14-day COVID-19 trend. When we speak specifically to that, what are we clarifying around the 14-day COVID-19 trend? Because as to Dr. Robinson's point, we're under a time crunch.
Okay, so here we go. Percent positive of the people tested in Palm Beach County, right? We want a downward trajectory for 14 days. The question is, what's the percent positive that this group thinks is the target? We've heard 5%. We've heard 10%. Some documents said 15%. So I guess first we agree on the words, and then we can agree on the percentage, right? So
Yes,
I
ma'am.
mean, and these metrics on and MMR internal. I'm also internal medicine, so God bless you for continuing to practice. But these metrics on the slide don't give our career educators the guidance they need. These are buckets, so we need to be more specific in the buckets for them. And that's what I'm trying to push us into. I'm not trying to be rude or take over this meeting. I just know where we need to go. So do we all agree that percent positive of the people tested in Palm Beach County, a downward trajectory of percent positive of people tested in Palm Beach County is a metric?
Yes.
Absolutely.
In the chat box, we're hearing great consensus around that. So yes, Dr. Robinson, it's state goal being that of 10%, coming from Dr. Alonso.
Okay. So everybody agrees with that. We can say the downward trajectory on the percent positive people tested in Palm Beach County is what we will monitor, and and it's actually said over 14 days, but we want it to reach 10%. So if we say 10% decreasing trajectory, is not just decreased trajectory, it's 10%.
Now that may be well and good for planning to have a hybrid or moving forward, but the ideal rate would be 5. Now I know the state of Florida has a whole different outlook towards these numbers, but for having in classroom learning, you want to aim towards that 5.
Okay, so I'm
Because
just clarifying that we're not really saying downward trajectory. We're saying percent positivity rate of less than, whether it's 10 or 5. I'm removing downward trajectory from the conversation now.
So, but for clarification for a non-medical person, is that over what I've read is like a 3-day rolling average?
14-day. There's a
Well, see,
14
that's the downward trajectory language, is the 14 days, right? And the
No,
percent positive would be the 3 days. Am I wrong? Correct me. Go ahead.
no, I think Dr. Malecki and I are on the same page. I'll throw this out here, Jean, but just looking at New York State's, it was the 14-day rolling average. In other words, a 3-day average, you can see how we bounce around. So that's why when you talk about a trajectory or a trend, that's why we're looking at that 14-day period, so we can be assured we have, reached a certain level, whatever we decide will be the goal, the metric we want to use.
Mhm.
Okay, so I'm going to leave that alone. I don't think that's what the plan said, but what I'm saying here is, are we looking at downward trajectory or are we looking at a number, whether it's 10% or 5%?
I think you're
What are
looking.
we saying?
I think you're looking at both. You want a downward trend, and it's a 14-day 14-day rolling average, and the main goal would be to hit 5%. But as you see things come down on a regular basis, you're planning to go ahead and get into your hybrid modes and more of the inpatient, in classroom. But it is a rolling downward trend. And when you get to a certain number, you say, wow, the lights are on. Just given the data we have today. And that's something you could actually aim for.
Okay, so then what I'm hearing out of this part of the conversation is actually two different numbers we're going to look at. One, the percent positive, the average percent positive. You're saying rolling over 14 days. Okay, before I argue about that, I'm gonna pull the New York thing, but whatever that is, that's the downward trajectory over 14 days, right?
I don't agree with the downward trajectory. We're getting mixed here. You could be a downward trajectory and be at 25 coming down to 20.
Correct. That's what I'm saying. It's two different numbers that I just heard in this conversation.
Yeah. No,
so are we saying both or one?
I'm trying to go away from the downward trajectory. I think we need, to have a metric with where is our weight, our average ending up. And then we're just discussing what number of days we're going to use for that.
Right. So let's just first start with the downward trajectory, because I'm with you. So do we skip the downward trajectory and just look at percent positive?
I think that's going to be less confusing because it seems we've got people confused with this discussion, and we'll look then at the period of time we're going to be using for that level that is determined. We're talking 5, I'm hearing 10%, but whatever that level we use, and then you determine that period of time for the rolling average, that has to be met, right?
I'm good with that. I'm just trying to bring this in for a landing.
Yes. So Dr. Robinson, can you clarify then? Because I've heard two different things as well. I hear number of cases decreasing for 14 days and then percent positivity at 10%, right?
Right.
Again, I don't have MD next to my name. So help us clarify what that metric is and where we're placing it. What is this consensus? Because chat box filled up, but at the same time, I'm hearing two different things. I want to make sure we're correct.
What I heard is that it's a 14-day rolling average at 10% or lower for test positive. So no trajectory here. But I want to bring up trajectory for just strictly number of cases. So just number of cases in general, strict numbers, does downward trajectory work there? So 10,000 plus whatever it is today. And if that number decreases over 14 days, that's a separate, there we would use trajectory.
Yeah, and actually Dr. Alonso just texted me, so I'm agreeing with her. So first, let me just say to Representative Wilhite, we are talking about Palm Beach County data. We're not talking about state data, right? Just so I think that's a good clarification. So I think we're talking about two different numbers, and this is what Dr. Alonso's suggestion is. One, a 14-day downward trend for the number of cases, just the number of cases. Did we have 200 test positive and then 100 test positive, or the reverse? So just the number of cases. And then the second is the percent positivity, and we want that to be below 10%. So we
Understood.
have, okay.
Yes,
I got it. Yep.
I was going to say.
So there's no trajectory talk for the positivity. Okay, I'm gonna just confuse y'all. Never mind. I'll talk to myself about that. Never mind.
No. I too got a text from Dr. Alonso. She's saying, yes, that is in concurrence with Dr. Malecki. Now I'm hearing from Dr. Robinson and Dr. Fishbane. And going back to the chat box, we do have HAC consensus on that metric aspect. The only other piece that I want to make sure that we clarify, Dr. Robinson, you did not bring up the ICU capacity, but Dr. Alonso has, and in doing so, want to make sure that if this HAC would weigh in on that aspect, does that need to stay a metric? And in doing so, what does that look like in your all's professional opinion?
This is Jean Malecki again. The ICU capacity should be stayed in as a metric that's followed. And the ICU capacity should be at approximately 30% capacity, which means that 30% of beds are available in the hospital, in the ICU, as well as in the general hospital, which will give you more beds. That's really a sort of a national statistic that's being brought upon in most states right now. So I would definitely look at that.
Okay, and the last piece is the ILIs, the influenza-like illness. How much consideration and priority are we placing on that piece, especially as we're forecasting flu season and other aspects rolling into the next few months? Thoughts on that metric specifically?
The state plan also has COVID-like illness, and both of those are based upon emergency room and outpatient visits, right? Now, I don't personally know, this is something Dr. Malecki or Dr. Alonso will have to answer, how you pull that data, but I think it should be monitored, because that's what tells us essentially what's happening in the street, right?
Dr. Fishbane, I see you speaking, but you're on mute.
No, I was just saying, I agree with what she's saying. Unfortunately, couldn't have Dr. Alonso here, but that is the real time. That's how we often know before, we see the hospitalizations and other rates increasing. That gives us a heads up of what's going on real time.
All right. In looking at those metrics, we have touched on each of the 5. We've had more robust conversation on some than others, but in looking at the time, we are at 4 o'clock, and we are very cognizant and appreciative of your time. We know today is time is currency, and in doing so, we want to make sure that we're very respectful of that. Dr. Vinoy, before we would close out on this, we want to make sure that you have the opportunity for final remarks back to our esteemed HAC Health Advisory Committee.
Yeah, appreciate the conversation today. What I'm going to do, my team will follow up with Dr. Alonso. We will go through more of these metrics with her, and then we'll bring that back to this group for further discussion. So that way we can have an outline. She's going to probably more than likely help me understand the state guidelines and all the different things that need to be in place. Sounds like to me, as I hear you professionals talk through this, is that, as we move along this journey, some of these metrics actually might change depending on what's happening. And so sounds like to me, once we get sort of the outline of the metrics, and I'll get that from Dr. Alonso, and once I bring that back to the HAC, then we will still be adjusting them based on what's happening, I guess, in our county, if not the state. And so really appreciate it. I mean, I'll be honest, it's not often that those of us as educators are even allowed to sit and it still does sound like you're talking a foreign language, but we're going to learn it. We're certainly going to learn it. And I just appreciate you. Jay, I turn it back over to you.
Yes, sir. As always, this esteemed collective put together by the superintendent is not only well respected, but it is appreciated. And as we continue this journey of reopening Palm Beach County schools, we call upon you. I think that was evidence in our last board meeting, and certainly will be tomorrow. So thank you all again. You'll continue to get correspondence through the superintendent and myself.
Jay, before you hang on, are we going to talk about?
Yes, Mr. Osborne.
Are we going to talk about one of the topics we want them to be thinking about for next time?
Yes, we do. I appreciate you saying that. As far as a next action step, we're really looking at the idea of, now that we've talked through metrics and wonderings around that, how do we start to move towards that brick and mortar opening? Really looking at the idea around protocols and practices. And as we shift into that brick and mortar and that thought process, what are these best practices and protocols? I know specifically Dr. Robinson has some thoughts around what New York State is doing and aspects around that. But really, the charge for our next meeting, which we will call in the next 10 to 14 days, will be around practices, protocols for a safe reopening of brick and mortar schools in Palm Beach. Keith, anything you'd like to add before we close?
Yeah, so we will review these metrics again, and then again, if we're going to close a facility, what that looks like, and we are looking at Representative Wilhite probably next week, if not early the week after, for the next meeting.
Can I ask a question? This is Jean Malecki.
Go ahead,
Yes.
Dr.
Are you required, absolutely totally required, to follow the state statistics and mandates?
This is Donald Fenoy. So everything is a recommendation and guidance. There have not been any hard and fast yet. So I think that's the best I could give you right now. Everything is guidance and suggestions.
Great, thank you.
And tomorrow night, the school board will be taking action on a recommendation from the superintendent, the team, to delay start of school to August 31st for students. So we are looking to push back to the 31st. And that'll be tomorrow's board meeting.
So this is Dr. Robinson. I need to add something. I know you're trying to close out, but also to think about for the next meeting is what we would monitor on our dashboard once we start going back into brick and mortar schools, and what would be the metrics to make us move backwards. Like what would need to happen to trigger us to go back to full distance learning, for example. I think we need to give some thought to that. And then the other thing I'm gonna just ask you to consider including in the metrics that we're discussing today is if we can disaggregate that data by age. Someone mentioned before what and I've read a similar study about 10 seem to be some magic demarcation, like the students younger than age 10 have less risk than those older than 10. I know the state has data online for age less than 18, but if we can monitor data by age in smaller chunks rather than just less than 18, that might be helpful to us too.
Notation made. Thank you, Dr. Robinson. With that, closing out final comments. We appreciate you. Thank you again for your time and service and helping our superintendent steer Palm Beach County stakeholders to success and a return to brick and mortar schools for SY21. Thank you again. We'll be in contact soon. Be well.